At -50, most trucks never turn off. Every video about winter trucking tells you that. Idle all night, or risk a dead battery and a block of frozen diesel by morning. But there's another category of truck out here. Its engine is off, completely off. No exhaust ribbon rising into the dark, no diesel burning away for nothing. And the driver inside is still warm, still breathing slowly, still safe from a cold that kills exposed skin in under 2 minutes. He didn't gamble on blankets. He didn't leave a 40,000-pound engine running for 8 hours to protect a sleeping man. He spent somewhere between $8,000 and $12,000 on a machine the size of a large cooler, bolted behind the cab, doing a job most drivers on the road tonight have never even heard explained. By the end of this, you'll know exactly what's inside that box and why it might be the smartest money a trucker ever spends. If you're new to the channel, we go deep into the machines that keep freight moving through conditions most people never see. Stick around, because what this system does at -50 is stranger than it sounds. Here's the part almost nobody outside the industry understands. The box behind the cab isn't a heater. Not really. It's a second, miniature truck. It has its own 2-cylinder diesel engine, smaller than a lawnmower's, built to Environmental Protection Agency Tier 4 emission standards. It has its own alternator. It has its own fuel line, tapping straight into the truck's main tank. Companies call this an auxiliary power unit, or APU for short, and the best-known one on American highways is the Thermo King Tri-Pack Evolution. While the 18-wheeler's main engine sits completely silent, this little engine is doing the work. It's running the heater. It's running the air conditioner in summer. It's keeping the batteries charged so headlights and dash electronics don't drain overnight. And it's doing all of that on roughly 1/5 of a gallon of diesel per hour. Compare that to a full-size engine idling at 0.8 to a full gallon an hour just to keep a cab warm, and you start to see why fleets call this unit cash flow positive from day one. But fuel savings alone don't explain -50. At that temperature, comfort isn't the hard problem. Keeping the truck itself alive is the hard problem. And this is where the design gets clever in a way most drivers never get walked through. The APU doesn't just blow warm air into the sleeper. It shares coolant with the main engine. There's a closed loop running between the little diesel engine in the box and the massive one under the hood. So heat generated by the APU can actually warm the truck's engine block from the outside all night, without that engine ever turning over. Thermo King builds a specific option for this called the Arctic Package. It watches the main engine's coolant temperature on its own. If that temperature drops toward a threshold where a cold start would become difficult or dangerous, the APU wakes itself up. No driver input required. It fires its own small engine, pushes warm coolant into the truck's block, and protects the one system that would otherwise gel, stiffen, and refuse to start by morning. Think about what that actually means. A machine watching another machine while a human sleeps through it. The driver isn't the one keeping the truck alive at 3 in the morning. The APU is. If you're finding this useful, consider subscribing. We break down machines like this one every week, and it genuinely helps the channel grow. Now, here's the twist that separates a good APU from a great one, and it's the reason the price tag climbs as high as it does. A cheap electric APU, the kind that runs off a bank of batteries with no engine of its own, works fine in a Georgia summer. It struggles badly in a North Dakota winter. Batteries lose a huge share of their usable capacity in extreme cold. Ask any driver in Arizona what happens when temperatures spike, and they'll tell you a battery-only system can fail to last a full 8-hour rest period. A diesel-fired APU doesn't have that ceiling. Because it's burning fuel to make heat, not draining a finite battery, it can theoretically run for as long as there's diesel in the tank. That's the difference between a system that helps and a system a driver can actually trust his life to on the coldest night of the year. This is also why the price sits where it does. Green APU, one of the manufacturers building these systems, prices its Star Edition unit starting near $15,000 installed. Other diesel APUs from major brands run $7,000 to $12,000 before labor. Installation alone can add another $1,500 to $3,000, since a shop has to mount the unit on the frame rail, run new fuel lines, tie into the coolant system, and wire the whole thing into the sleeper's climate controls. It sounds expensive until you run the math the way an owner-operator has to. A driver idling roughly 10 hours a night, around 3,200 hours a year, burns close to 2,400 gallons of diesel just sitting still. At recent fuel prices, that's close to $9,000 spent to do nothing but keep a cab warm. Switch to an APU burning a quarter of that fuel, and the unit often pays for itself within 12 to 18 months. There's a second cost most drivers don't think about until a mechanic explains it to them. Every hour an engine idles is an hour of wear with almost none of the benefit. Idling coats internal components in unburned fuel and soot, forces the diesel particulate filter to work harder, and shortens the life of expensive parts like turbochargers and fuel injectors. Some fleet estimates put the wear from a year of heavy idling at the rough equivalent of 25 to 50,000 extra miles on the engine, without the truck moving an inch. An APU sidesteps almost all of that, because the massive main engine simply isn't running. There's also a legal pressure pushing fleets toward these systems that most outsiders never hear about. States across the country now cap how long a truck can legally idle. California limits it to 5 minutes in most areas, with fines that can climb to $1,000 a day under Title 13 of the California Code of Regulations. Illinois and Alabama don't allow idling at all outside narrow exceptions. New Jersey and Delaware cap it at 3 minutes. Almost every one of these laws carries the same built-in exception. If the truck is running an approved auxiliary power system instead of the main engine, the idling restriction doesn't apply. So the $12,000 box isn't just about comfort or fuel. In dozens of states, it's what keeps a driver from getting cited for doing nothing more than staying warm. There's one more detail buried in federal weight rules that most drivers never learn until they've already bought the unit. Under the Energy Policy Act of 2005, trucks equipped with a qualifying APU are allowed to exceed the standard weight limit by up to 400 pounds, later extended to 500, specifically to offset the weight the unit itself adds to the truck. Congress built that allowance because lawmakers understood these systems reduce emissions and fuel use enough to be worth the extra weight on the highway. So picture the full night again, but this time with the box doing its job. The main engine shuts down completely the moment the driver parks. No idling, no slow bleed of diesel into the cold air, no $1,000 citation risk if he happens to be within 100 feet of a restricted zone. The Tri-Pac's small diesel engine kicks on instead, sipping fuel at a fraction of the main engine's rate, pushing warm air into the sleeper and warm coolant into the block through that shared loop. Somewhere around the coldest hour of the night, if the Arctic package senses the main engine's coolant sliding toward a dangerous threshold, the system wakes on its own and pushes more heat where it's needed, without ever asking the driver to do anything. By morning, the batteries are charged. The main engine's oil never went to tar. The fuel never gelled, because the block never went fully cold in the first place. No system is perfect, and a smart driver never treats an APU as a silver bullet. The unit still needs its own fuel supply, still has its own filters and belts that can fail, and diesel-fired APUs still need roughly $300 to $600 a year in basic maintenance to keep running reliably. Experienced owner-operators who've made the investment still carry a backup plan. A rated cold-weather sleeping bag, a propane heater for true emergencies. The same redundancy any smart driver would carry regardless of what's protecting the engine. But the shift in thinking is real, and it's spreading through the industry. For years, the answer to extreme cold was simple. Leave the big engine running and eat the fuel cost as the price of survival. Now, a growing share of owner-operators are treating that approach as the outdated one. Not because idling doesn't work. It does, and plenty of drivers still rely on it tonight. But because a machine engineered specifically for this problem does the same job for a fraction of the fuel, without the wear, and often without breaking a single anti-idling law along the way. That's the quiet shift happening across northern highways right now. The coldest nights of the year used to mean an engine that never stopped. Increasingly, they mean an engine that never has to start again until morning, because a smaller, smarter one did the work instead. If this changed how you think about what's actually keeping drivers alive out there, let me know in the comments. And if you want more of these deep dives into the systems most people never see, the subscribe button is right there. Stay warm out there, and we'll see you on the next one.